Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. On what I think is a fairly exciting week. We've got some new cards being revealed. I love that Pokemon in Japan are doing this at the moment. They're releasing these new cards on, it seems at times, a near daily basis, which is awesome for me because I get to come onto the podcast every week and talk about these awesome new cards that are coming out. And quite frankly, talking about new cards is one of my favourite things in the world. And if that makes me sad, well, sign me up for a ticket on the Sad train going off to Sad Town, stopping at Sad Station, because I'm on board. I think that metaphor might have been just a little bit too involved, but let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, we're rolling with it. I'm also going to tell you about my second regional of the year this past week. And even though my first regional went quite well, this one went even better. And hopefully we're going to have some time to talk about some City Championship results at the end of this episode. But we don't need to go too deep into City results purely because there are going to be several weeks of Cities. So I am going to give you at least a quick first impression of the Cities results. But really, as with all of these things, this isn't a kind of 1 week let's have a gander. This is really very much an ongoing thing. It's a case of it's going to keep going for a little while, so we don't need to get everything in straight away in one episode. It's going to keep coming back. I should also let you know that my YouTube channel, youtube.com/PTCGRadio, has got a whole bunch of fun things on there at the moment. Regionals games are going up in earnest as we speak. I've got a whole bunch up there from Huddersfield Regional, a few up there from London Regionals, and this past week when I went to Newport Regionals over there in Wales, I took my own camera and did my own recording, so those games get to go up and I don't have to wait for anybody else to give me the footage, which is frankly a very good thing indeed. Now, the first couple of rounds are already up there. Round 3, featuring a very exciting game, is going up there. It's going to be, I think, Tyrantrum against Manectric Bat. That's going to be going up today. It's already up there. It's already ready to go. It just needs me to essentially push upload, which I'll be doing shortly after this particular video. So yeah, lots of exciting things coming up. I should also warn you that you can find a complete archive of this podcast at PTCGRadio.wordpress.com, and if you haven't done so already, you should subscribe to this on iTunes, and you can find me on Twitter at TheWassy or email at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. Now let's start off with some non-new card news just to start off. First of all, there's going to be a Mega Gyarados collection. Now, this is not particularly exciting, I'm afraid. This is not the biggest, most exciting news we're going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks, but it's coming out, and I like to keep my news, let's say, comprehensive. It's going to be coming out in the US on February the 24th. There's going to be a figurine of Shiny Mega Gyarados, a holo promo of Shiny Gyarados, a code card, and of course some booster packs, 4 I believe. Yeah. And in Europe, we're getting a Shiny Mega Gyarados box that replaces the figurine with a jumbo version of the card, because nobody likes figurines and everybody likes jumbo versions of the card. Just letting that hang. Now, the other news, which is very bad news as far as I'm concerned, horrific news, not going to lie, came close to ruining my week, this news, which for Pokemon news is pretty impressive. It has essentially been confirmed that San Francisco's Marriott Marquis is going to be hosting Worlds this year, and it is going to be on Friday, August the 19th through to Sunday, August the 21st. Which is the weekend of my very best friend in the world's wedding, my best friend since I was 2 years old. And that means that I'm basically not going to Worlds next year, which makes me very, very sad, because next year it looked like I would be able to sort it out for the first time in a couple of years to actually get my bad self over there, and it's the weekend of my best friend for nearly 3 decades. It's the same weekend he's getting married, so not 100% ruling it out. Might get a new best friend by then. Might be able to talk him into delaying his wedding. might be able to convince him not to get married at all. I don't know. There are options. But unless something like that happens, that is bad news for me, and it makes me very, very sad. So, going over into some new cards then, let's cheer ourselves up with some new cards, because there have been some quite fun ones released this week. Starting off, there is a Sigilyph which has come out, one of these Pokemon that tends to have quite interesting cards most of the time, and it's got an attack. It's 90 HP Psychic Pokemon. For 1 colourless energy, during your opponent's next turn, if Sigilyph takes any damage, put 5 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. Now, you can, of course, combine this with Burst Balloon, that trainer card, the tool that we saw from a couple of weeks ago. And if your opponent attacks Sigilyph when it had a Burst Balloon attached to it, it would take 11 damage counters, which is quite frankly ludicrous. Not a good card, but there is, shall we say, some possibility there. Or it can do like 30 damage for 2 psychic energy, which is garbage. Utter garbage. There is a Slowking. Now, Slowking has had some interesting cards in the past, and this might be one of the most interesting. I am a fan of this Slowking. It's got the ability King's Inspiration. And it's a water Pokemon, which means that you don't have to play it as is. You can use Archie's Ace in the Hole. That's a porter that you can play if it is the only card in your hand. Put 5 cards into your hand from your deck, draw 5 cards, and put any water Pokemon on the bench as if it were a basic. Or you can use something like Wally to evolve a Slowpoke directly into a Slowking on turn 1. Now, the attack's kind of rubbish. Water and a colourless, 40 damage, but it does 40 more next turn. I.e., it will do 80 every turn. I do get asked about rulings like this. The deal is, Psycup does 40 damage next turn, i.e. it does 40 the first turn, and assuming Slowking stays in the active, it always does 80 from then on, because even though it does 80 one time, it does 80... Oh no, sorry, I'm lying to you. Presumably, it will keep going. Now, I should mention this is the current translation. As it reads, during your next turn, this attack does 40 more damage. So in theory, first it does 40, then it does 80, and during the next turn, it does 40 more damage, which is 120. We will need a proper translation. By the way, the website that I used to give props for giving me these translations is no longer getting free shout-outs on the podcast, because as it was pointed out to me by a couple of people this past weekend, the really good Call for Family attack, which I thought the Radstar had, it does not. Now, there are a couple of websites I used to use, and the one which I started using tended to be the most accurate. But the guy who runs the website has now decided that he is hilarious, and although many of his translations are good, and many of them are very obviously jokes, some of them he just goes a little over the top, but not completely, and attacks that now look good might be good or might be jokes. Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, from now on I will be checking Facebook and at least 2 websites on these translations, which means that I'm going to make sure that they are as correct as I can. Although I haven't had a chance to do that this week. I'm using just one website, a different website, don't worry. What I do always give you this warning, we are using Japanese translations, they are not official. But I will no longer be using that website to give me the translations, nor will I be giving it any props on the podcast. If you're trying to break news involving translations, don't make it vaguely realistic but a little over the top. Either be obviously stupid and jokey, or make it real. Because otherwise, people like me will stop giving props to your podcast. Anyway, the ability of Slowking, this looks good. Once during your turn, before you attack, you may flip a coin. If heads, choose an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon and move it to one of his or her benched Pokemon. Remember, the special energy cards like Double Dragon, Strong, etc. can only be attached to a specific type, and if you move it to another type, it gets discarded. This could be so useful, ladies and gentlemen. If you've got a Seismitoad in the active, he's got a double colourless, get out Slowking, flip a coin, if heads, attach it to Shaman, Crawdaunt, one of those. you can stop your opponent having the energy he needs to attack. And if you can get a head flip every turn, then every turn they attach an energy, and every turn you move it to somebody else. And of course, you can get multiples of these out and get rid of many energy in a turn. I like Slowking. And Stage 1 Water Pokemon, like we talked about with Frogadier a couple of weeks ago, Stage 1 Water Pokemon at the moment, you've got the whole Wally and Archie's Ace in the hole, either of which can be used to get a Stage 1 Water Pokemon out on the very first turn of the game. Now, when we looked at Parallel City, I raised the question if we were going to get other stadiums now, or stadia, I probably should say, which are going to have kind of dual affect both sides. And the answer is yes. We've got Reverse Valley. It's a half metal, half dark stadium. Although weirdly it's got a red and a blue side, but it's half dark, half metal. The metal side means that the metal Pokemon on the metal side take 10 damage less from attacks. The dark Pokemon on the dark side do 10 more damage to the active Pokemon. Now, I've been a fairly large fan of Baby Yveltal on this podcast over the next couple of weeks, and honestly, ladies and gentlemen, I believe this is going to continue, and this is a good thing for Baby Yveltal. Now you're not doing 30 damage, you're doing 40 damage, which means you add a muscle band and you're doing 60, not 50. And there's a whole big bunch of basics out there that have 60 HP rather than 50. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a pretty gosh darned big fan of this stadium. If you're using Metal or Darkness Pokemon, this is largely going to be the stadium you're going to want to see a lot of the time. I really do think it's going to see a lot of play. Now we have some new EXs. We have Sizor EX. Sizor EX for 1 metal energy does Steel Wing, 20 damage, and damage is reduced by 20 from attacks the following turn, or by 30 if you've got the stadium, or by 50 if you've got a hard charm attached to it, or potentially 7 if we've got the special metal energy. Or should I say 40 if you've got the shield energy as well. It's not special metal, it's shield energy. It came out in Primal Clash, and that reduces damage done to metal Pokemon by 10. The Stadium reduces damage done to metal Pokemon by 10. The Sizor reduces by 20, and then you can have a hard charm which reduces it by 20. If you add them all up, ladies and gentlemen, let me get my maths correct, 60 damage, 20 for the hard charm, 20 for the attack, 10 for the energy, 10 for the stadium. You can start tanking again almost. Now what we need is a good old-fashioned Steelix card, a nice big fat Steelix EX. That's what we need, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone that was playing back with Steelix Prime will know what I'm talking about. The second attack, Gale Thrust, 50 damage for 2 metal energy. If you put it from the bench to the active this turn, it does 110 damage, which, ladies and gentlemen, not to be sniffed at by any stretch of the imagination. 2-hit KO on basically everything, 1-hit KO on stuff that is metal weak. Quite like Sizor. Like the first attack, I don't like how little damage it does, but I like the fact that we're now in a situation where Metal are getting all these tanking cards. Although, as I talk about on the podcast quite a lot with these type-specific special energy cards, they've got to be really good to see some play, and so far Shield Energy has seen approximately 0 play. Now there is a Mega Sizor as well. He has a Spirit Link, as you should expect him to. 2 metal energy, Iron Crusher, 120 damage, and you can have a choice between discarding a special energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon or a Stadium in play, not to be sniffed at. There's a C-Dot, it's garbage, it evolves, it's got 50 HP and does 10 for 1 energy. Nobody cares. What people do care about is, and I'm willing to say this as an absolute fact with no possibility of arguments, Noctowl Break is the prettiest break we have yet seen. It is utterly, utterly gorgeous. Now, it's also potentially good. Now, I've been a fan of Noctowl. I don't think I've hidden that. I think I've been pretty open about my love of Noctowl. I like the Noctowl. Now, this is a Noctowl from the new set, which does 20 damage for each item in both players' hands for a double colourless. I wanted to play it with something like Vileplume. I haven't built a deck list I really like yet, so unfortunately I haven't been able to play it at tournaments. I didn't play it this last week in Newport, though I wanted to. But there was a lovely chap, Coach Trip Ollie Fenley, who I think went something like... He did read, I forget his exact finish, it was something like 5-1-1 or, 4-1-2 or something with Vileplume Regice. So I think Vileplume could be making a comeback in the near future with Noctowl. I'm a fan. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm not talking about the resurgence of Vileplume Noctowl. I am talking about Noctowl Break, and I like Noctowl Break. Now again, it's just an essentially stage 2 that just pops onto an existing Pokemon. So he pops over the stage 1 Noctowl, and remember with these breaks, you either get a new ability or a new attack. Noctowl has a new attack. Night Scan, 60 damage, plus 30 more for each trainer in your opponent's hand. So this one does rely on your opponent. Your opponent's got 3 trainers, 150 damage. Your opponent's got 2 trainers, 120 damage. Now it is for 3 colourless, not 2, but I still like Noctowl, and I will certainly be experimenting with Noctowl Break. There's also a Nuzleaf, kind of rubbish. It's dark type. The set is kind of built around metal and dark, so you'll be expecting the dark. 20 damage for a dark, 40 damage for a double colourless, but nothing if you hit a tails, not good. But we have a dark Shiftry. Blow away. For a dark and a colourless, flip 3 coins. If any are heads, look at your opponent's hand. And remember, and this goes for Noctowl and Noctowl Break as well, anytime you get to have a gander at your opponent's hand, it gives you information. It allows you to predict what they might be doing in subsequent turns. It gives you information, and that is very, very good. So it allows you to look at your opponent's hand, and you discard a number of cards from your opponent's hand. Discard, not shuffle back into your deck, equal to the number of heads that you flipped. So if you flip 3 heads, you get to look at your opponent's hand and discard 3 cards. It reads, look at your opponent's hand, then discard a number of cards, i.e. you get to choose which cards you hit. Now it is a stage 2, so we're talking turn 2 at the absolute earliest, but imagine if, let's say for argument's sake, you judge your opponent and then you blow away and hit 3 heads, and yes, I know there's only a 12.5% chance of hitting all 3 heads, but let's say you do, you get to leave them with 1 card in hand. Let's say you hit 1 heads, and you look at their hand and they've got a couple energy and a stage 1 and a Sycamore. You get to discard the Sycamore and then sit laughing in their face while they draw dead. This, ladies and gentlemen, has potential to be, quite frankly, really, really annoying. Now, Shiftry does have a second attack as well. I'm a little bit less enamoured with this than I was about the first one. But for a dark and a double colourless, 60 damage, choose 1 trainer card in your discard pile, put it in your hand. Now, if that was for a double colourless, I would be in love with this attack. Dark and a double colourless, let's not forget that you've got Baby Yveltal, who is quite good for accelerating dark energy onto your Pokemon. And don't forget that in Expanded, you've got the trainer card Dark Patch. So potentially good, especially in Expanded, but the fact that it's free energy on a stage 2. Now remember, trainer card includes stadium, supporters, tools, and everything of that nature, but I think free energy on a stage 2 is maybe just a little bit too much. Now there is an interesting little Phantump. For 1 colourless energy, it's got the attack Ascension. Search your deck for a card that evolves from Phantump and put it onto this Phantump. This counts as evolving Phantump. And you can do that on turn 1 of the game. Now, let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, that we have the trainer locking Trevenant from, I believe, X and Y. The one where, as long as he's in the active, your opponent cannot play any trainer cards. Which means, now your opponent will get a turn, but it means that on your first turn of the game, you go second, and straight away, you get to go Phantump and straight away you get to just go Phantump and then attach an energy, do the attack, and then boom, you get right away into your Trevenant, ready to roll. Now we also have a Ferroseed. He is a basic, he's a metal, he's just kind of rubbish. For a metal and a colourless, you get to... Well, it's weird. It's if the attack would do 60 or less damage, prevent it entirely. If it would do more than 60, 70 plus, this attack essentially does nothing. If you've got 2 energy on a stage 1 60 HP that you're trying to evolve, you've probably lost, or at least you are getting behind in the game, ladies and gentlemen. So, yeah, don't be terribly excited about him. But Ferrothorn, I should say, on the other hand. Now here, there is a little bit of excitement, which I think you would be justified in feeling. Spike Whip for a metal and a double colourless. 10 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon times the number of colourless in their retreat cost. Now, this is for a metal and a double colourless, but remember you would be playing this with Bronzong, so getting the free energy on there would be much, much easier. That's the Bronzong that has the ability which allows you to attach a metal energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. Now, what I like about Ferrothorn is it can hit everyone, but it's very dependent. Any Pokemon that has a Floatstone attached has an effective retreat cost of 0. They have an effective retreat cost of 0, and that means that they will not be taking any damage, whereas if you've got like a 4 retreat cost Pokemon on the bench, then they will be taking 4 times the base damage, which means that you'd actually be doing 40 damage to them. So if you can be spreading 40 damage to every Pokemon on their side of the field, that's pretty good. Pretty good indeed. So yeah. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, that's the new that's the new cards for this week. I like going through new cards; they make me happy. So, let's talk about the regional I went to at the weekend. Now, it was a regional. Now, I told you about last week how I came up with what I thought was the excellent idea of Yveltal Vespiquen. I then gave it to my lovely friend Joe, who then turned around and gave me a much better list, shall we say. He put the bats in and took out the EVs and just, quite frankly, made it much, much better. And I didn't get to play this. And Joe went along to the regionals and won the regionals. And this made me very, very sad. But hey-ho, these things happen. So, this past week, we went to Newport. Now, Breakthrough, this is down in Wales, but this was the very first tournament where Breakthrough was legal. But it didn't have a huge amount of effect on the format. Now, I was testing Yveltal decks all throughout the week. I was testing Yveltal Gallade, and oh my goodness, did I come redonkulously close to playing Yveltal Gallade this past week. The theory being that you've got Gallade from Breakthrough, you use Maxie's hidden ball trick to get him out as if he were a basic. He hits for weakness on stuff like Manectric, and he's very, very useful because his ability lets you look at and reorder the top 5 cards of your deck. He makes your he makes your deck more consistent in the mid-game as well. The problem I was finding with this deck was very simply that it wasn't consistent enough. There were many, many games where I got turn 1 Gallade. And there were many, many games where I ended up essentially either decking out or coming so close to decking out that I just couldn't get it working. There was also a weird situation where in 80% of my test games I started one of my 4 unknowns out of 12 basics. But even taking that into account, it just wasn't... It just wasn't enough. It just wasn't good enough. It wasn't consistent enough. It just wasn't working. Now, believe me when I say I would love to have got it working. But the reality is I just couldn't. Now, if we get to a stage in Expanded, and I have got an Expanded League Challenge coming up Saturday after this one, and I believe Eviltal Gallade will be my deck of choice, or something Eviltal with a Gallade in. Because in Expanded, these Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick, Archie's Ace in the Hole, they are much, much easier to get out. I played Eviltal Archeops at an Expanded League Challenge earlier in the year, and I tested it a lot, and you would pretty much always get the turn 2 Archeops, and he was again just a fighting Pokemon that you would get on the bench using Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick. But you would often get about 40% I was rocking the turn 1 Archeops. It was very consistent. And the reason is you've got Jirachi EX and you've got Computer Search, which means you can essentially go Ultra Ball for the last 2 cards in my hand for a Jirachi to search it out, or you can go Computer Search for the last 2 cards in my deck and search it out. It really does up the odds of hitting it. So that was out. So then I started going just Vespiquen Zoroark Eviltal, Zoroark Eviltal Bats. But as soon as you take out the Vespiquen and the Battle Compressors and all of that, the deck was just clunking way too much. So I tried making Vespiquen Zoroark Eviltal, but you ended up with way too many stage 1s that you needed to attack, and the discards were too horrible. And I tried, ladies and gentlemen, I really tried. And I did say last week on the pod I wouldn't be playing Eviltal Vespiquen, and when I said it, I meant it. One of my listeners actually came up to me on Saturday and reminded me of this fact. All I can say is this: I genuinely intended not to play it. And then at 10 o'clock on Friday night, Joe came back to me, Joe who top decks all the regionals. Joe came back to me and said, Ross, I've got a good list. And he sent me the list. And it was a good list. It was really, really good. So I played it on the Saturday. Now, huge thank you. I had a bunch of listeners to the podcast I hadn't met for, half a dozen people I hadn't met before, who came up and introduced themselves and told me they enjoyed the podcast, and that was really, really cool. I know I've met a lot of the UK people who listen to this, but if you're in the UK and you're listening to this and I haven't met you yet, I like meeting Pokemon people. They tend to be nice people, so if I ever am at a tournament and you're there, come and say hello, introduce yourself. It would be lovely to meet you. And thank you to the people this weekend that did. It puts a smile on my face. It does feed my ego a little bit, which maybe isn't such a good thing, but it puts a smile on my face, and I really, really appreciate it. I really do. If you don't like the podcast, just pretend you don't listen. Don't come and tell me you hate it. That's just going to make me sad. So I played Eviltal Vespiquen Bats, and I don't know if it's a coincidence, but I have seen this popping up in tournaments in the US, etc. I'm not saying I started a trend, but I'm suggesting that I might have started a trend. There we go. So, where are we going with this? Yes, I played Eviltal Vespiquen Bats. Let's see how my tournament went. In round 1, I'm doing all right. I'm doing slightly better. Essentially, I am drawn against Mark Taylor. Now, he is Sam Taylor's father. We had 63 people at the tournament this past weekend. And for those of you that don't know, the kicker for top 16 points, so the top 16 finishers get points rather than the top 8, is 64 players, which means with 64 people, the top 16 get points, with 63 people, the top 8 get points. So me and a whole bunch of other people chucked in £1 so that we could get him at the tournament, and then somebody gave him a Houndoom deck, and off we went. He was officially in the tournament when all he'd really done was try to drive the minibus down. A really, really lovely chap. I had a really, really, really fun game against him. I don't have a good list against Houndoom. It's not a very good matchup for me at all. Game 1, Mark was still trying to get to grips with the list, and I just went aggro Vespiquen. I drew a whole bunch of Golbats and Crobats early game, and once you start discarding them, you've only got Zubats left and they ain't much good. So I just dumped everything I could. I went full on Vespiquen, and I managed to eke out a win. And it was a very long win because Mark literally picked up the deck. He hadn't played for 6 months. So we had a really nice game, and he was chatting to me, and I was explaining to him about the rules, and indeed explaining to him how his deck worked, giving him little tips. And then we didn't finish game 2 because game 1 took so long. Really fun game. Bit of a shame. And Joe won round 1, playing the exact same 60-card list. Round 2, I'm sitting next to Joe. We're both playing against Fighting Bats. And Bats are an awkward one for my deck because Combi dies to Golbat very quickly. 2 Golbats, kill Combi. Not particularly great. And game 1, I don't draw very well. He gets Zubats out much quicker than me, kills my Combis, I lose quite conclusively. Game 2, he forgets to put out his prizes. He's already done a bunch of searches. I get a free prize card penalty. I have nothing in my hand until I draw the free prizes, at which point I hit Juniper, I go off, and I win. Now, this game is very much 50-50. It goes like this. If I can get my bats out nice and early, take a couple prizes with Evil Tau, hit into Lucario EX with Crobat, because he does double damage because of the weakness, get a few bats damage going around, and then clean up with Vespiquen at the end, I win the game. If my opponent has a faster start, gets 2 or 3 Zubats down early game, he can get rid of my Zubats or my Combis, and I never get the Vespiquens to sweep, I never get the Crobats out, and it doesn't go well. Game 3 is an awkward one. My opponent has a slightly better start, but I'm about to even it up and time gets called. Now my opponent plays very aggressively and puts himself in a position to win, but we run out of time, nobody's taken 6 prizes, so we go to a draw. Now, had that game carried on, my opponent would have won. But he had to, or he was ahead at least, but he had to get rid of a whole bunch of resources to put himself in that position, and he admitted himself at the end he may well not have done that had time not been called so quickly. And I was in a half-decent position. It would have been interesting to see how it would have ended, but it's a moot point. I'm at 1-0-1. Joe sitting next to me draws and ends up at 1-0-1. Round 3, I play against a, what am I playing against? Round 3, I'm playing against a Giratina Aromatisse, and I like this matchup, because essentially, my opponent has to spend a couple turns using Geomancy to get energy on the board. I can use that turn to set up, get a whole bunch of bats out, dump some Pokemon for my Vespiquen, and he needs at least 4 energy onto a Lugia or a Giratina in order to get the win. Mid-game, he makes a bit of a slip-up, he sticks out a Lugia with 4 energy, gets a KO, and I'm able to get the KO with a mixture of bats and Vespiquen. I knock all his energy off the field, and then I start working up my Vespiquen, so he's never going to win. Now I make what I think is an interesting decision in this game. I win, I think, 3 turns later than I should have done. I sit there and I've got game in 5 turns, in 2 turns. But what I decide to do is not take the game, but instead start my 2 turns when he's going to start going. I.e., I know he's going to have to Geomancy twice, because I've killed his only Aromatisse using bats. He's going to have to Geomancy twice and then attach a double dragon to get attacking with Giratina. So although I can use Vespiquen to take 2 prizes, I just decide to use Evil Tal instead. And just, do 10 damage to his active Xerneas. And he misses a Geomancy, so I do that for 3 turns, and then I do my 2 prize win. And the reason I do it is, I know I've won game 1, and I don't think I'm in any danger in game 2. His deck's a bit slow, and my deck against slow decks, it's a beautiful, beautiful matchup. But I don't want to risk it. So what I do is I sit there, and I just let him play. And I win the game 3 turns later than I need to, which takes about 5 extra minutes. We don't get very far into game 2. We've only completed 1 game. I win the match. Possibly dodgy, but I looked through, and with something like that, well, he needs 2 energy on the field before he can do anything. There's no Aromatisse to move the energy. He's got a full bench, so there's no Spritzy coming down, which means until he's Geomancy twice, I know I'm in no danger of anything bad happening. Worst case scenario, he brings up a 2 energy Lugia. It's not even enough to get a KO on a Vespiquen, and then I can at worst 2-hit KO him. And then in round 4, myself and Joe are again sat next to each other. We're both sitting at 2-0-1. We're both playing Night March. We both pull out the win. Night March is a very, very good matchup for me, because Evil Tau KOs everything for 1 energy starting on the first turn, and Vespiquen picks up the slack. Now, the only way Night March wins is, as long as I don't put a Shaman down, or at least if I put it down, I get it back in my hand. If Night March goes first and goes second and gets the first KO, And I never get a Lysandra to take a KO on one of their Shaman. And I never get a KO with the bats, so it just goes 1 KO each turn, Night March wins. But if I get the first KO, or I get a KO with bats at any point in the game, or I get a Lysandra KO on the Shaman, I'm sorted. Now, it does get complicated if I have to bench a Shaman and he gets the KO, but any turn he Lysandras a Shaman is a turn he can't text Maniac to turn off my bats, so that's probably going to end up being irrelevant. It is nerve-wracking because you do have to keep the pressure going, but I win both games moderately comfortably. And me and Joe are both sitting at 301. And then me and Joe play my very first ever 60-card mirror. And game 1, I go first, and I think it's the only game all day I get 3 Zubats out. Which means Joe knows he can't put down a Combi, and he only gets... So I get my Combis, I think I get 3 Zubats, 2 Combis, and an Evil Tau turn 1. It's a ridiculous setup, and because I have a better setup and it's a 60-card mirror, I win. Game 2, Joe ends up benching 3 Shaman because there's nothing else he can do. He draws horrifically and I win. I don't feel good about myself. I really don't feel good about myself, but I am sitting at 401 and basically guaranteed cut at this point. Joe unfortunately has to play him a neck trick in round 6 and ends up missing cut, and I feel terrible. In my final round, I'm drawn against Rick Cherry's Evil Tau Zoroark and IID. Now, I have told you guys I am not a fan of IDing. Here is my rationale, and you can take it or call me a scumbag. Firstly, Rick's a good friend of mine, and we both wanted to make cut, although we both were basically in cut even with a loss. More honest, as I said, I didn't go to London Regionals last week, so I wasn't feeling well. I still wasn't feeling well this week, so I had the opportunity to not play a game, have an hour to sit down and rest, and I took it. Feel free to call me a scumbag, but, you know, it had to be done. I needed the rest. I took the rest. Please don't hate me, but I sat down and I had a rest, and I went into top 8, where I lost to Nitesh Delub's, I lost to Nitish's, what was he playing? Fighting Bats, for exactly the same reason I told you before. It's a 50-50 matchup. Same, simple as. Game 1, he gets more Zubats and a better start than me. I lose. Game 2, I get my Zubats, basically because he went first. Game 2, I go first. I get my Zubats out. I win, basically because I went first. Game 3, I draw rubbish, have to bench a whole bunch of Shamans, there's nothing I can do. I did record the game. It was not very well played by myself. I was not feeling well. But it will be going up on my YouTube channel in the next couple of days for you guys to have a look at. So, let's have a quick look at the top 8 of this. I'll talk about the way that Breakthrough impacted the tournament, and then we'll finish off by taking a very quick gander at the city's results. So the people who lost in top 8 at Newport, we had myself with Evil Tau Vesperquen Bats, made me very sad, but I think we've talked about that enough. We had Reese Williams with Gengar Trevenant, and no surprise that I was, shall we say, keen to face him in top 8. Annoyingly not the case. Gengar Trevenant making a bit of a comeback, did make a couple of top 8s in London regionals, although that was more Gengar Wobbuffet. It's very simple. Trevenant, we've already actually mentioned him on this podcast today, which is weird because we don't seem to have mentioned him for a while. Trevenant is a stage 1 that blocks trainers when he's in the active, and you play a couple of Wallies to try and get him out turn 1. Gengar hits you for having about 60 plus poison, switches back to the bench, and essentially rinse and repeat. We had Rick Cherry with his Evil Tau EX, Evil Tau Zoroark deck. Nice and simple, you play the break as well. So you can either attack with Evil Tau EX, you've got the baby Evil Tau for your Night March matchup, and to be honest, in most matchups, you know, either you want to use Zoroark Break or you want to use Evil Tau EX. Oh no, Evil Tau's weak to Lightning, can't use him against Mega Man. Oh, wait a second, Zoroark can hit Mega Manectric for 110 for 1 energy. Oh no, I don't want to use Evil Tau EX against Rayquaza EX because he can one hit. Oh, wait a second, I can just use Zoroark and one hit KO him by filling my bench. Fun little deck. And Jamie Serhan's Mega Manectric Giratina, a very interesting deck. But rather than sit and tell you about it now, I will refer you to the Round 2 video from Newport Regionals, which is already live on my YouTube channel, where you can see that deck in action. In top 4, we had 2 Lucario Bats decks going down, one played by Nilo Dieguez, and one played by Nitish the Lube, the chap who knocked me out in top 8. And Lucario Bats is very standard. It's good nowadays because the Bats, and once you put a Focus Sash onto Lucario EX, now he does hit through resistance, which is really, really helpful against your Pumpkaboo, which means Lucario is killing your Pumpkaboos and your Joltix quite easily. If you put a Focus Sash on, it means your opponent cannot one-hit KO it without getting rid of the Focus Sash, which means you'll generally take 2 prizes with Lucario before your opponent KOs it, and then you've got the Bats to start taking down everything else. Even something like a 60 HP Pumpkaboo, you evolve to Crobat, 30 damage, you attack with Crobat, 30 oh wait a second, he's dead. So it can win the prize trade against Night March, against anything else. Just the onslaught of Bats and Lucario, it's so fast and so efficient damage-wise, it's just hard to keep up with almost any deck. You know, Lucario for 2 energies doing 60 damage, and that's before you include Strong Energy and Muscle Band and Fighting Stadium and the damage that you're giving out with Bats. It really is a very fast, efficient deck. Speaking of fast, efficient decks, the final saw Scott Simmons' Manectric Bats taking down Cheyenne Bardwar's Manectric Regice deck. Manectric Bats, very, very much like Lucario Bats. Manectric for 2 energy does 60 damage or 120 if they've got a tool attached. And if you go Mega, which a lot of like the Manectric Bat decks actually don't bother with, but if you go Mega, then you can be doing 110 for 2 energy. And then you've got your Muscle Band, and you've got your Bats to attack, and you've got your Rough Seas to heal. Again, just like Lucario Bats, it's very, very efficient. And if you're thinking, hang on a second, doesn't Lucario Bats smash Manectric Bats? It depends. If the Manectric Bats gets the Bats out faster and uses the Bats to take down Lucario, then no. Of course, if the Lucario Bats gets the Bats out first, they use their Bats to take out the Bats, and then Lucario to take out the Manectric. But we had 2 Manectrics taking down 2 Lucarios in top 4, so shall we say far from an auto win. Manectric Regice, really good against a lot of stuff, but you can understand why Cheyenne lost in the final, because Manectric Regice against Manectric Bats, well, Bats beats Regice most of the time. You know, Bats are more useful in the mirror than the Regice. Plus, you know. So, yeah, just really, really good. And, of course, the Regice can block attacks from the EXs. So, Manectric Bats and Lucario Bats are really starting to take by storm. There was a lot of Night March at the tournament this past weekend. None of them made top 8 for a very, very good reason. And that reason is it loses to Bats. Well, it doesn't lose to Bats, but Bats certainly cause it a lot of problems. And it loses to Evil Tau. And if we see the top 8, you've got Manectric Bats, Lucario Bats, Evil Tau Zoroark, Evil Tau Vespiquen Bats, and then a Gengar Trevenant, which leaves a non-EX in the active for 1 prize, while one-hit KOing, while blocking trainers. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, it's really hard for Night March to beat any of those decks. The format has shifted away from Night March, and the thing about Night March is it's going to be good. Night March will always remain good while it's in the format. The problem is, it's very easy at the moment to make a Night March hate deck. Just make a deck that can jump ahead in the prize race using the Bats, or take KOs while stopping it functioning, Gengar Trevenant, or just win the prize trade outright, the Evil Taus. There were some good Night Marches, and Emma Cooper she actually ID'd in the final round, went 5-1-1, 4-1-1, and ended up just missing out top cut. She was the top rated Night March on the day. There were plenty others around the top tables all day. It was a good deck. It was well represented. It did well. It just really didn't do quite well enough. So in this particular tournament, how did Breakthrough affect the format? Well, Floatstone saw quite a lot of play as opposed to Switch. Judge saw some play. Giovanni saw some play. That supporter saw a little bit of play here and there. And that's about it. Jirachi, I don't think Jirachi's as good as other people are saying. I think it's a bit of a damp squib. I did put a Jirachi in my deck. He didn't get much use. The problem is, even if you use Jirachi, your opponent gets to take a KO by using Lysandra or Escape Rope. And I believe we will... I mean, we already saw a little bit, but I think it's only going to see more of a rise in the amount of escape ropes that we see being played over switches to get around stuff like Jirachi. One of the things people are saying about Jirachi is, well, you know, Jirachi's all well and good because all I need to do is, you know, I can put a Jirachi up against a Seismitoad and I can get rid of his DCE, and even with a Muscle Band, Seismitoad only does 50 damage. Okay. Well, that's true. Or at least it was true before Giovanni's scheme was released. Now, with a Muscle Band and a Giovanni scheme, then it actually leaves it open for the Seismitoad player to go ahead and do 70 damage in one turn and KO that pesky Jirachi. Or just, you know, use stuff like Lysandra to pull up something else into the active. I think Jirachi is a fun little tech as a one-off. I don't think it's really going to affect the format like that. Now, in terms of new attackers and new decks properly, we did see Houndoom see a little bit of play. It's got some good matchups, but it really didn't do very well at the tournament at all. We saw Zoroark see a little bit of play, but it was only really Rick Cherry that had any success with Zoroark. Other than that, you know, we had Manectric Bats, Lucario Bats, Eviltal Vespiquen Bats, Gengar Trevenant. The decks that did well at this regional were not decks that were selected because, oh yeah, you know, breakthroughs out, let's play with these new cards. They were decks that were selected as metagame choices to fight the format as it was, with an assumption that no new decks from Breakthrough would come out and start smashing. And honestly, ladies and gentlemen, that's not what happened. Decks didn't come out and start smashing. It really was the same old. And as I told you about my tournament, we saw Giratina, we saw Night March, Lucario Bats, Manectric Bats. We didn't see many decks that were new, and that's why we didn't need to make changes. Now, there's plenty of scope for this in the future, but not for the time being. Now, if we look at cities, we see a very similar thing going on. However, there are a few changes around. So, let's look at the new decks in terms of cities. Eviltel Zoroark. Now, this is a deck that I have played around with a lot, and in cities, and the Charizard Lounge, a website which I don't use it too much, and I like to be honest on here. I'm not going to give, you know, until I reach some kind of partnership or get some kind of sponsorship, the thing that you can be sure about on this podcast is I ain't plugging people for the niceties of it. I'm plugging websites which you should use. I'm plugging YouTube channels like Joe's Omnipoke. Check out Omnipoke, guys. It is fantastic, that I really think you should be using. So, for instance, the CharizardLounge.com. I don't read many of the articles, although the ones I have read in the past are interesting, but they are awesome for collating results. They are superb. And they've managed to get all of the cities' results. Now, I'm not always a fan of how they go about putting them together, but I am a fan of them, you know, getting them out. For instance, they're listing Eviltal Gallade and Eviltal Regirock separately to Eviltal Zoroark, and some of the Vespiquen they've listed, I'm pretty sure had Eviltal in as well. However, they've collated the results and I haven't, so thank you to the Charizard Lounge for, quite frankly, doing my job for me. And they've collated all the 23 cities together. So looking at the new decks, Eviltal Zoroark, 2 wins, 3 seconds, 7 top 4s. That's pretty gosh darn good. Now, 23 events, if we take all the top 4s, that gives a total of 92 potential spots. If it's taking 12 out of the 92 potential spots, that's not amazing, but it's pretty darn good. Now, I disagree with their 1 and 2. I would put number 1, actually we'll get to that in a minute, because there is another borderline relevant new deck. Mega Mewtwo EX, the Psychic Infinity one, the one that you pile a whole bunch of energy on and smash. Played with Aromatisse, saw 1 win 1 second place, and no top 4s. And that's kind of what I'm saying here. It saw, 23 tournaments, a win and a second. When you're seeing data like that, it could be that there's only a couple of players that have a good enough list. It could be that there's only a couple of players that are really playing it to a high standard. Or it could just be that 2 people that played it saw positive matchups and or ran hot all day. I don't know is the honest answer. I wasn't watching all 23 city championships. As fun as that might be, I think that might be too much Pokemon even for me in one weekend. And that's it in terms of new decks. Eviltal Zoroark saw a little bit of fun. And to be honest, from what I saw on the internet, I believe a lot of that was in one city championship, which just suggests one area getting a bit of buzz over the one deck. Obviously, both of the first weren't in one cities, but I believe that wasn't spread over even the overall 23. And Mega Mewtwo, which we had 2. The top deck, I would say quite conclusively, is Night March. 4 firsts, 4 seconds, 4 top 4s. Now, that was 12 overall cuts, whereas there were 13 overall cuts from Mega Manectric. But when you see 3 first, 3 second, 7 top 4s, I would take 4 first, 4 second, 4 top 4s over 3 first, 3 second, 7 top 4s. So, by my calculations, that makes Night March top. But there is a hair in it, ladies and gentlemen. There really is. Second place deck, we see Mega Manectric EX, and then third place we see Eviltal Zoroark, and then we see a little bit of a drop-off. Now the thing about Mega Manectric EX is, again, and this is, and it's not, I'm not blaming the Charizard Lounge here, there is supporting issues here as well, but it's hard to define what these decks are. Some of these Mega Manectric decks are probably played with Regice, some may be played with Giratina, or any card, because you can put any basic energy into a Mega Manectric EX deck, hit 110 with the active while attaching 2 basic energy to anything on the bench. But then the Eviltal decks have been listed all differently. If we were to collate all the different Eviltal decks going around, Eviltal becomes the best deck in the format. Because Eviltal Gallade had a second and a top 4, and Eviltal Regirock had a win. So if we put all of those Eviltal decks together, and I'm cheating just a little bit here, but I'm allowing myself to do it, then Eviltal Zoroark has 3 wins, 4 seconds, and 8 top 4s, giving it 15 top 4s overall and putting it at the top. But what we can say here is that at the moment, and remember that week 1 of Cities is a fragile state. Week 1 of Cities is before stuff has really kicked off, before we really see everything kind of getting together properly. The first week of Cities is everyone going, this might be good. Especially the first week a new set is released. Next week and over the coming weeks, the format will start shifting out. Because what's going to happen is some people are going to look at these results and go, that's a really good deck, I want to play it. Other people are going to look at those results and go, if these are the good decks, here is my counter deck that's going to do well. In the same way that, in the first couple of tournaments after Ancient Origins came out, Eviltal Vespiquen Bats may be a terrible deck. By the time London Regionals came around, and I explained this on the previous podcast, and thank you to the emails I got from people who said they appreciated that particular part of the podcast. Like I say, feeds my ego, and I like it. When the format, really shook out into Night March and Toadina, that deck became really, really good. Whereas at the beginning, it probably wasn't a good play. So we need to wait a couple of weeks for these results to keep coming in. Other decks that did well, Lucario Bats, 2 wins, 1 second, 4 top 4s. Yeah, that's going to go up. Because to be honest, I think Lucario Bats would have a decent matchup against Night March and most Mega Manectric. Although it didn't in top 4 of Newport Regional, so what do I know? Dragons and Bronzong got a win, 3 seconds and 2 top 4s. Vespiquen in whatever, line got 2 wins, 2 seconds and a top 4. Raichu Crobat got 2 wins and 2 top 4s. Gengar got a win and 3 top 4s. Seismitoad Giratina, big fall from Greysale, 1 win, 1 second, 1 top 4. But remember that decks like Eviltal Zoroark and Vespiquen and decks like that really feed on that particular deck. I don't think that there is... I don't think there's much we can draw from Week 1 cities, and that's what I said at the beginning, so I'm going to pretty much leave it there. What I can tell you at the moment is there ain't a lot of change from Breakthrough. Zoroark seeing a little bit of play. Mega Mewtwo is really, really on the fringes of playability, but it's still Manectric, Lucario, Night March. They are the big decks. And Yveltal, ladies and gentlemen, is making a comeback. But then again, one of the reasons Yveltal's been making such a comeback lately is because there's so much Night March, and baby Yveltal's really good against Night March. Maybe if Night March sees a drop in play, and decks like Mega Manectric come around in greater and greater numbers, people aren't going to want to play Yveltal anymore because it doesn't have the same positivity against it. I don't know, but it's going to be fun finding out. Make sure, ladies and gentlemen, that you check out my YouTube. As I've said lately, I'm going to a lot of effort here, and don't get me wrong, it's one of my literal favourite things in the world to do. But I'm going to a lot of effort at the moment to upload a whole bunch of decks that, you know, a whole bunch of games with full commentary from all kinds of tournaments. I've had a couple people get in touch to offer me footage from their city championships to commentate on, and to anyone out there who's wondering, hey, if I sent that dude some games from my cities, would he commentate them? The answer is yes. The only way the answer will be no is if I physically get too many games and I run out of time. But because it's genuinely one of my favourite things in the world to do, for as long as I've got time, I shall make a little bit of time to do so. And if you do want to send me any footage of any games, you can find me on Twitter at @TheWassy, or you can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. I've already had about 3 people tell me they're going to be sending me games from their city championships, which I say about 3, that's really weird. It's exactly 3. 3 people have got in touch to ask. Which is, you know, exciting, and if there's more out there, the more the merrier, ladies and gentlemen. You never know, there is still a chance that I could be invited to commentate at Worlds this year, except I probably can't make Worlds. But you know I've been saying this for months now, we need a non-American commentator at Worlds. I love American people, many of my favourite people are American, but it's still the only part of the World Championships that does not have an international flavour. And even though I can't go Worlds, you know, I just like commentating. It would be nice to be asked. So yeah, if anyone knows anyone high up at Pokemon, go give them a poke. Or send in a support ticket. Anyway, I've gone to the point of rambling, so let me wrap this bad boy up and let you guys continue your morning/afternoon/evening/whenever. Find me on Twitter at @TheWassy. Email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. Please check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/PTCGRadio. Watch all those videos. Show me that the time and effort I'm putting into popping those videos up is not ignored. And yeah, that will about do it. Next week we'll be back, hopefully with some new cards, definitely with some deeper analysis of city championships. From now on, every week will give us more data that we can use to really mould opinions, shall we say. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Look after yourselves till next week. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.